Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the HR and Payroll 2.0 podcast. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Pete. I think we're doing a memory lane trip today.
Yes. I'm super excited for this guest. It is a very much a legendary HR outsourcing and transformation executive that I admire, that I've worked with. I know you've worked with at some point. He is the former CEO, now board member at OneSource Virtual, Mr. Trey Campbell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be with you guys and to see you both again.
Yeah, man. I know we've crossed paths. I've worked for you, worked with you in my career. I've worked with OSV for many years as an analyst. I know Julie's probably been on the other side of deals. And you've been around this industry for a period of time that I think have seen the good, bad, and the ugly. And I thought it'd be great to share, what your thoughts are on where we come from, where we're headed. So
Yeah, you never told me why you left working for me back in NGA. I wondered if it's something I did or
no,
Isn't
man,
that
it wasn't
under, like non-disclosure or
ready
something?
to ramble around the neighborhood on something else, I guess.
No, it wasn't you, man. It was just just opportunities knocking, right, and
Yep.
and a chance to do something different.
No,
But
I
yeah,
hear.
Julie, you want to do the honors? Get us started.
I do. Trey, we always ask and want to know, how did you get into the HR payroll space and why do you stay?
So I started in the mid 90s. I want to say it's 96, just to date myself, back in the dinosaur era. But I went to work for Price Waterhouse before they bought Coopers and became PwC. So my early career was with AT&T, and we had started getting into some outsource there. I was with Lucent Technologies toward the end. Got an opportunity to join PW, and they were starting a new global outsourcing unit. And it was headed by one of the vice chairmen, sort of a very exciting ground floor opportunity. So I ended up joining them in 96. And then, learned a lot in a short period of time. Back in those days, everybody was vertically integrated. All the major global 500s did everything themselves. And we were out there on our soapbox trying to say, look, you shouldn't be doing everything yourself, right? You can get scale, but you can't get scale beyond where you are in terms of your size and your geographic footprint. So let us bundle, let us bring a number of different large organizations together and we'll get to a new scale point. So that's really when I started. And I can tell you, whether or not that ultimately was successful, but that's how I started.
Hey, I actually have a new favorite question for this year. What did you think you wanted to be when you grew up? So, we harp on do what you want to do or think about that was not a thing in our day, but what would you have said you wanted to do?
I always get asked that question. Did you want to be a CEO? Is that what you aspired to do? And the honest answer is no. So I wanted to run a business, right? I didn't need to necessarily be a CEO, but I wanted to have my own little thing that I controlled all the various aspects of. And so in terms of my career, what I ultimately did was try and assemble all of those experiences that would qualify me to do that, right? So take a turn in sales, I actually started in sales, take a turn in operations, take a turn in, all the different things so that you can relate to the people that are doing those jobs. And so ultimately, by the time I came around that circle, the opportunity presented itself to start running larger businesses and ultimately landed with OneSource Virtual.
Oh,
Yeah.
man. All right. Well, I was banking on astronaut, but
No,
Yeah.
you were much more planful and
I'm afraid of
linear
heights,
about
Julie,
getting.
so astronaut
Yeah.
was not going to happen.
All right.
Trey, were you one of the founders of OSV? Right?
No.
Okay.
No, there are 4 founders.
Okay.
Started by Brian Williams, Wesley Bryan, and Britt Wirt. That was back in 2008.
Yeah.
So I didn't join
Wow.
until 2016.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
it was an interesting company. By then I'd been Hewitt's, I'd been with Exalt, I'd been with Accenture, I'd run different parts or all of those. So, these guys were a different sort of animal, very entrepreneurial, very sort of diving catch oriented, so lots of heroes around. But what they really wanted and what Brian talked to me about was, industrial grade, right? So how do, I'm tired of the diving catches, somebody saving the day at, 2 a.m. How do we make this run consistently, accurately, and at scale and be able to, continue to pump transaction volume through it? So that was really the reason why I joined OSV.
Yeah. I love it. And shout out to Brian. I always catch up with him at HR Tech. He's great to talk to.
He's a character.
We always have lunch or drinks or something. But Yeah, look, I want to go back to that because like I grew up in this world too, right? IBM, NGA with you. Actually, that's where I went from NGA.
Yep.
TCS, worked with Mark Bradley over there at
Right.
TCS.
Yep.
Obviously, I spent a little time in PEO and ADP when I was very young. So I always saw the value in HRO. But there was this period of like hot and heaviness through in the late 90s, early 2000s, especially into 2008, where it was the in vogue thing to do, right?
Yep.
Outsource, offshore.
Yep.
Then we went to the cloud wars. Then we had, now we're moving into an AI kind of a world. But yeah, go back. I want to go back to the Exalt days because
Sure.
here's what I'll say, and I want Julie's opinion about this. When you think back about kind of the pioneers of HR outsourcing, effectively, transforming HR through outsourcing, Exalt had such a great reputation. It became Hewitt at IBM, TCS. We got our ass kicked all the time by Hewitt and Teals. We had a lot of things we had to fill. But the point is, there was so much tremendous stories and transformation outcomes and just leaders like yourself that came out of those Exalt days. Take us back to that, man. Like, what was that time like, and what was that like being at Exalt that made it different, I guess?
Well, let me take a step before Exalt. So when I was
Yeah.
at PW, we had 5 different areas of outsourcing that we focused on, one of which was HR. The other was F&A, application support, real estate, and procurement. Those were the 5 that we did. And if you had asked me in those days, in just the formative years, whether HR would be the one to take off, I wouldn't have predicted that. So we worked on a deal with British Petroleum for quite a while when I was at PwC. We couldn't get it going, or couldn't get it closed. A lot of independence issues, very conservative culture, not a lot of risk taking in a big 5 firm. And that was part of the issue. So I had left and was at another place in between those two. And, out of the blue, we see this monster deal signed by this, little startup called Exalt with BP. And it was like $1 billion. Like, what the hell? Who are these guys? And it was interesting. I watched them from far. They did a deal with Unisys, a small deal. And then they did another $1 billion deal with Bank of America. And this is all before I joined. And it's like, holy crap. So just being in the industry and knowing how difficult we had a time with BP, it was like, what is the deal? So, I got introduced by a mutual friend to Kevin Campbell and to Mark Hodges. I don't know if you know Mark.
I know of them. Yeah.
In those days. And, they were looking to sort of retool their sales operation. And I ended up joining and heading North American sales in 2001. But I would tell you what made them special was singular focus. That's all they did. They were very well capitalized, very sophisticated management team, even if it wasn't a large team. So, you had Kevin running, he was ex-Accenture. You had Jim Madden, who was the CEO, and he was coming out of, the MCI company. It was doing outsourcing in the IT space. I can't remember what.
Oh, yeah. I remember. I can't think of the name either.
Yeah, it was a very sophisticated management team. Not huge, but very good. And, they were just wheeler dealers. And they caught BP at a time when they were actively trying to disgorge, SG&A expenses. Same thing with B of A. You have to have the right executive leadership that just, I tell people all the time, the executive philosophy weighs large in an outsourcing decision, right? Either I can't imagine not doing that myself, or I don't want to do that myself. One of those two. And, depending on what kind of situation you're in, you'll follow from there. But when I joined, it was very much, a smaller operation. The whole place was run by about 30 people. An unbelievable amount of trust among the management team. It's like, look, I'm going off in this direction. I've got to accomplish this. You go off that direction. We'll meet back here, and we both need to get our shit done. And it was very, very, very good camaraderie in that respect. And I've tried to emulate that very much at OSV, by the way. But it was one of the best places I worked.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was how I ended up there. We ended up doing a deal with, I anchored in Memphis for 9 months, not long after I joined, and did a deal with International Paper, which is where I was on 9/11, 2001. Everybody knows where they were. I was sitting in Memphis negotiating a contract there.
Wow.
But it just, it became a really strong success because of really those dynamics. And then, as you said, once these big things started getting announced, all of a sudden everybody's jumping in. IBM, Ceridian.
Trey, a lot of the big BPOs got into HRO as well, right? I was with TCS for a period of time, but Emphasis did some for a while, but they never really seemed to do well with it. And I think it was almost like, I feel like they tried to sell it and operate it the way they did other outsourcing services, and that's not going to work ever with HR. But why do you think none of the big BPO players ever really did well?
It's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to make them work and profitable. So, the
Yep.
promise that you get into is, hey, I'm going to transform your operations and I'm going to make it 30% more efficient. I'm going to
Yeah.
share 10% with you and I'm going to, live off the other 20% I can wring out. But what it requires is often new forklift technology. Everybody's on back in those days, an old
Yeah.
SAP platform or, one of that was all best of breed at that time. We didn't have, the big ERPs like Workday that would do pretty much everything. But inevitably, you would get into the hard part of process redesign where you're like, look, you got 10 processes for hire. I got to have one. And, they couldn't navigate the political difficulties of doing that, the change. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, I told you I would do that, but I really can't. And so then you're like, well, wait a minute, we have a contract. They're like, yeah, well, you knew what it was
Yeah.
like when you married me, right?
Yep.
So lots of conflict and you have to have a very experienced and deft leader of that to navigate,
Yes.
to have a chance of getting through and then ultimately making your business case work. And so many, of the early deals, Wachovia and PepsiCo and others just went off the rails, right?
Yeah.
For that reason, right? I thought I could do it. I can't. Now the provider
Yeah. Yeah.
cannot achieve its business case. DuPont was one that spectacularly blew up. J&J. So even when we joined Hewitt, we thought all of a sudden we had all these new players and we could go, we would do 1 or 2 deals a year. And we did 15 in our first year in combination with Hewitt. And we didn't have enough experienced folks to manage that. All of a sudden, you got bonfires everywhere and a
Yep.
very difficult situation to try and dig your way out of. So, the
Yeah.
head CEO of Hewitt ends up getting fired. The head of outsourcing gets fired. Ultimately Russ Fraden, who you may know, came in to try and clean it up. But yeah, that's ultimately the problem. Overpromising and
Yeah.
then unable to get the customer to do what they said they would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trey, I think there's some things, underlying your tale here of how you grew into it and really how all of us were growing into it, those of us that grew up in it, that folks that are younger and didn't live through it might not recognize. And so I was jotting down a couple of them here. The first is, as you mentioned, PwC was in it in a number of different areas. And so, if you think the typical areas of BPO or ERP, they were all in the mix back in those days when folks were getting into that, except for Exalt, right? Who's very focused and specialized in HR. And so if there are folks that are, listening that are thinking, oh, wow, we're moving toward ERP and ERP is a thing, it's actually a thing. It's a thing again, that's where we started, a couple of decades ago. The other thing that I don't know if people know, but you made allusion to it is those early growth into this space early on was by land grab. And so,
Yeah.
in order to credentialize yourself, you
Yeah.
had to say, I'm doing somebody really big like P&G or whoever. And so IBM would get in and they'd take that over and it wasn't transformed. Nothing
Yeah.
was different. They just, did some badge flipping and figured we'll sort it out along the way. And so everybody had their little
Yeah.
land grab, right? That credentialized them. And yet none of them had actually yet done what it is that
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
were selling and for efficiencies. So like those things were a big part of that journey, and I see ways that we hearken back to those things now as we come
Yeah.
around today. And you mentioned processes, right? The automation wasn't the principal path. I mean,
No, no,
that it
no,
is
no.
today. So, you were grabbing your bodies and you were trying to do more with cheaper bodies or, condense
Yeah.
the bodies and process harmonize
Offshore.
that way. And so we just have a totally different lever right
That's
now.
right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So yeah, we would assume that by commercializing an operation, taking it out of a captive and putting it in its own business, results set of metrics, we could probably squeeze 20% efficiency improvement out of it. But yeah, and then the levers that we used back in the day were moving to a more efficient technology, offshoring was a big tool, and not as much automation. So when I came
Yeah.
along with OSV and their whole platform was around automation, I was really excited about that.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of lift and shift back in the day
Absolutely.
versus, yeah, I mean, we got to a
All of
point
them.
where, oh, it
All of
was,
them.
yeah, you're a
Yeah.
mess for less. Yeah, and that
Yeah.
always is fine until it's not, right? It's like at some point you're still gonna outgrow you got the same problem. You just moved the problem
Yeah.
somewhere else. So
So
yeah,
Convergys in particular with
Yeah.
DuPont and J&J were
And
just
JJ.
massive fireballs.
yeah,
Started warning everybody that, this was not necessarily a panacea.
Pete, you asked about about some of the India heritage guys, right? And why maybe that model didn't take as well, and
yeah,
why Exalt seemed to have pixie dust because they were HR focused. But I mean, if you think about it, you don't squeeze and make more efficient in finance where you have numbers of folks repeating the same thing over and over again. That was their DNA, and trying to apply that to HR,
right.
which is a lot less linear and a lot less scale, was always going to be a challenge.
Yeah, what I saw at TCS was just that they were trying to put it through a model that was selling a completely different product, right? Like selling to IT and selling to finance is a completely different thing than HR, just by default inherently. And then you layer into that when you're approaching it like selling IT, it just falls flat, right? And it's not staples and servers and whatever. It's human resources, and there's an intimacy to that. You got to come and you sell that face to face and have relationships and long cycle times and trust and all that. And it just didn't work, right? It just was being sold at arm's length and not in the same, not in the same way they would have sold like IT or something is what I saw. So, but Trey, I want to ask you, like, from all that you learned during that kind of era and those days, like, what did you see that you brought to OSV that you were like, we're going to structurally do some things differently? But
Well,
what else?
offshoring
Just,
comes to mind immediately. We
yeah.
don't offshore at
Yep.
OSV. What I found with trying to offshore HR, you can do IT, right? You can do SAP application support and all that stuff. But when it comes to things like payroll, there's no concept in a foreign land of our payroll scheme here with local jurisdictions and tax. They're just completely cold on what that is or how that works. And so you
Deductions.
basically have to incubate from nothing to try and create the ground, to be able to plant this. So the only time I did it successfully was at Accenture. We spent 18 months preparing a team to take over payroll in Bangalore. And even then, what happens a lot of times is you will get your core team and they'll get poached. And so you can't keep them very well. And so when I joined OSV, I was pretty down on the offshoring scenario from the standpoint of that, plus customer service, right? Just being able to understand, and a lot of people at that time had soured on the notion of everybody you talk to has got a really foreign accent and all that stuff. So we decided to stake our future on the automation side, not offshore, and it's that way to this day. I mean, we've spent tens and twenties of millions of dollars on our Atmosphere workflow engine, which automates all the transactions and
Yeah.
treasury and all that stuff. And, I think it was absolutely the right choice. And if somebody were to say, hey, go start me another OSV, take, write whatever number on a piece of paper
Right.
that you want as far as compensation, I would not attempt it. I
Yeah.
would not attempt it. I mean,
Lightning in a bottle.
we're 20 years into the evolution of that. It takes a
Yeah.
long
Yeah.
time
It's taken a long time. I would agree. I've
to,
watched
and
you guys grow up.
we innovate every year on that workflow engine.
Yeah.
It
I
it
love
makes
that.
me feel like that pressing in or leaning into that technology and automation stuff is now table stakes, right? And now we're talking differentiation by services and trust, right? And relationship.
Well,
And
and you've also got banking challenges nowadays. Back in those
Mm,
days, you had these smaller boutique banks that would take a chance on you, and nowadays you just can't, right? So if you don't have enough scale and you don't have enough credibility, it'd be hard to bootstrap something up from nothing,
yeah. Yeah.
because of
You
the
know,
banking environment.
it's interesting when you were talking about this, just this, how we got away from the lift and shift era. And then we went into I feel like it was like the cloud wars. Everybody was going to cloud. And then now we're going into the augmentation and automation sort of thing. But one of the things I think was, I think was a mistake by buyers for I saw this as an analyst over the last 10 years is so many of them stayed focused on outsourcing, meaning cheaper. And I try to teach many buyers that I work with to say, listen, you got to understand that you're stepping into an innovation cycle now. You're buying things that you will never proliferate from an organization who is proliferating technology to fundamentally fortify your compliance, right? Your payroll, your HR, your benefits, whatever. And I said, you have to think about that as you're not just your mess for less anymore. You're buying into the innovation that's going to future proof. I hate to use that word, but future proof your business. Why would you expect that that's going to be cheaper? You know what I mean? Just address that a little bit because I think there's still this conundrum out there that people think like, well, if I'm outsourcing, it's automatically less expensive. And I don't think that it always is.
I think it all depends on the level of service that
Maturity
you want to buy.
too, yeah.
How much staff you want to keep versus how much you want to truly outsource. So it can absolutely be more expensive than having a relatively inexpensive person sitting there doing soup to nuts everything
Yep.
you need.
Yep.
What people learn over time is they're incredibly dependent on key man risk there. And when that person decides to retire or get married or leave the country, whatever the case may be, all of a sudden you're in panic mode, which happens to us all the time, all the time. It's like, oh, my payroll manager retired. I don't have anybody who can do this, blah, blah, blah. Can you help me?
Yeah.
So I think there's that. There's the ability to have redundancy in the system and resilience if something goes wrong.
Agreed.
But
yeah.
no, it's not always cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of myths with outsourcing that have changed just with the way technology is. And I mean, I'm just curious your thoughts. I mean, obviously you guys at OSV were very leaned into Workday, obviously cloud. What did that do for from going from those, old days to then going to the HR BPaaS sort of days now? What do you feel like that did for both the customer and the vendor in terms of being able to service around that capability?
Well, I think it makes it much more likely to succeed. So back in the old days, we were doing have it your way.
Yeah.
Bespoke, tell me what you want and I'll deliver it. Very difficult to scale. Now you can't have it your way with us. You can have 5 different flavors. And as long as you pick one of those flavors, we're going to do an awesome job for you. But we don't do custom, right?
Yeah.
So it enables us to share people across accounts. It enables us to leverage the technology in the same way. You can't have it your way. And so I think that has been a big turn in the road. And a lot of folks have become, even large companies have become much more receptive to saying, okay, we're going to align with your model as opposed to demanding the have it your way approach because it's, it has those inherent problems.
I think the bigger they are, the more kicking and screaming they've gone down with, right?
Think back, right? Think back to all those deals, just right off the top of your head, all the PeopleSoft deals, right? And no knock on PeopleSoft. It's such a beloved, wonderful system.
Sure.
But there are companies out there, I'm telling you, I've seen it. I've done the due diligence. They are married to that. That's it, dude.
They're so customized that they can't get out.
They are
and
married.
still on it.
They are married.
Sure. Yeah.
So that I think is a great proof point that I love the fact that cloud kind of created, I think it was a great outcome for the buyer for sure, because it guardrailed them from themselves, but then put you in the position to actually succeed as a managed service provider to actually do what they need you to do. And you guys can perform better together, but with those guardrails. So
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
totally.
Now we have lots and lots of happy customers.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was like, well, I've got special KPIs and I can't keep track of them all. And I can't teach my people, which, can't, swap them across accounts because all that's different. They've got to be, so I think it's much more sustainable.
Yeah. And the resiliency part, you talked about that. That's such a critical piece here in HR and payroll. Trey, when you look across like the customers, right, you deal with a lot of customers. There's been I would say, I don't want to say a boom. There's definitely been a rise in managed services. And I think that's all being driven by a mix of the complexity, right? The fact that more companies are in places that they didn't expect to be. The skill sets are waning in every pocket, including payroll and HR, right? Everybody's aging out and, not starting out here. There's a lot of convergence of what is driving managed services, but what are kind of some of the conversations that you guys are having with bigger customers or just customers in general about why now? Why managed services now? What are they thinking about in terms of the future?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. That philosophical executive that we talked about earlier, people change over. Somebody who was born and raised in the company and now is the CEO, has a lot of loyalty to the people that are there, isn't really interested in talking about cutting jobs, that sort of thing. They change. Now all of a sudden, I've got a high dependency on a small number of people. I'm very much at risk, different thinking. The other thing that tends to be a catalyst is some sort of major error. So payroll taxes
Yep.
comes to mind, right? You are 1 hour late on your federal tax filing and you are subject to a 10% penalty. So that can rack up huge penalties. And if that happens once or twice, it's like all of a sudden I'm just throwing money out the window because I can't, I've got human error. I had somebody out that day, whatever the case may be. But all of a sudden, this notion of, doing it on the cheap is costing me a lot for, what the downside could be.
Yeah.
So I think, situational is a lot of it and philosophical is a lot of it.
Yeah. I wish we could get people out of the reactive mode for payroll. We've talked about that on here. I feel like, it's such a catalyst buy. It's like I'm in pain, or I bought something, or I sold something, or something's happened before people go and sort of address it. I wish we could get folks to line up like the iPhone and want the next the
Sure,
next best
sure.
payroll. Maybe someday
Well,
we'll
the
get
other
there.
thing is the uncertainty. Like a lot of people will move to Workday. That's what they wanted, and their
Yeah.
payroll folks are, I have no idea how to run it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing. I'm stumbling all over the place. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And so we actually have a 90-day, hyper support period for a new customer coming onto Workday because of that very reason. Even
Yeah.
when they take the training, they don't really know how to work inside the application.
Right. And maintaining it. Yeah. I see a lot of that as well. Just thinking about like kind of where we're headed, right? What's the value prop going to be for HRO in hell now or 2030? Like, what are we talking about, you think?
I mean, I don't see any major change. I think there will be those that feel like they need to do it themselves, and others, increasingly in my mind, are like, why in the world would we want to take the risk of doing that and, have the key man risk and all that stuff? So more and more, we're seeing a gravitation to, okay, well, I'm at least going to use you for this, this, and this. And then over time, we have a very strong record of we get in with the basic services and they're like, well, so-and-so quit on me. How about doing this? And, as long as they're happy and they're good customers, we'd love to grow with them.
Yeah.
So I don't really see it changing, Pete. Workday has embraced it wholeheartedly. They continue to move down market into smaller enterprises, which is where they are very used to using an ADP or Ceridian-like service.
Yep.
And so we're bundling with them now. They're selling our product now as part of as a natural extension to their software. And I
Yeah.
think that was a big milestone back in 2022 when we started working with them on a co-sell model. And it really has improved their ability to counter the value proposition of others that bundle software and services.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an area you've seen them bolster, especially the global payroll side, just trying to give customers more ways of solving for
Sure.
that service infrastructure and compete with the UKGs and the
Yep.
Dayforces and others. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Don't get me started on the global payroll though. That's a whole
Yeah.
different topic.
Well, what are your thoughts? Go ahead. You can opine. I'd love to hear it.
What I would tell you is since I've been in this business now 30 plus years, the customer has always wanted the same thing, which is one payroll provider doing everything globally, hopefully on the same system, and the sun shines all the time. And the reality is here we are 30 some years later and no one's cracked that code.
Yep.
And there's a reason why. And it's because it's very hard. Until the countries align around some common set of standards or laws or what have you, it's always going to be a country specific service with dynamics that change, every year. And you've got to maintain compliance and you've got to maintain local knowledge to do that.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
trying to do that centrally, for more than say 10 or 12, countries is just really not feasible.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing too, is just, that centralized visibility is absolutely desired, but the regional or localized, I guess, specialization is also looked to as well. I think you're seeing a lot more of that regional plays happening in some of these
Yeah.
bigger deals.
And the providers can't make money. It's not profitable.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's hard to cover the whole world and be everything to everybody.
right.
But in my mind, the critical flaw, which is almost always a part of the wish list, right, is there's one system, one provider. It's all going to be together,
Right.
harmonized, living in harmony, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and there's a lot of things that you can do strategically that maybe don't look like that, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes a lot about governance, and it becomes a lot about what's actionable and what you should even try and what you should just leave alone because there's no scale,
That's
and
right,
and
because
you
it
have
won't
to
get any
just
better.
let it go. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Particularly small populations, very difficult to manage, with 100 people in a country and think that you're going to do that profitably. And then things start getting upside down and then tensions are high. And I mean, I've tried it many times,
Yeah.
tried it a
Yeah.
bunch of different ways.
You've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Yeah. I love it.
Got
I
the
love it.
scars would probably be more accurate on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to kind of look to the future here too, Trey, to kind of turn the page on that one, but on the global payroll part. But I want to think about, I don't know if you've seen Phil First and the Horses for Sources point of view on services as a software. Have you seen
I
that
have not,
much?
no. I know
Okay.
Phil, but I have not seen that, no.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with him. I believe it is where services are going to go, right? I think managed services are going to be largely automation driven, data driven, that sort of thing. And I think you will see that sort of services as a software kind of experience with AI. I think AI, or excuse me, EOR is ripe for that. I think there's a bunch of services that would be that. Do you see that as, I mean, just what's your thoughts, I guess, on automation and AI? Does that align with what you sort of envision the future is for this?
I think many things are suitable for that, right? I think you can
Yeah,
help us with question and answer, inquiries, enrollments, things that are relatively straightforward. But of course, you start when it requires contextual judgment is when you start getting into a more difficult application for that. So we're using it today as part of the inquiry and knowledge base type process. We're starting to work it into our automation routines with respect, along with RPA and our own, custom coding. So will it completely 100% displace any need for humans in the process? I don't think so.
yeah. I think
agreed.
that's the new unicorn, right? Like the single one system, one global payroll. Now you hear a lot touchless payroll. And let's take what we used to outsource or offshore and let AI do all of that, and just let payroll kind of run itself. And yeah, that's the new aspiration. But I think we're going to find it is at least as difficult to achieve as
Well, yeah, I mean,
one single global payroll.
don't forget you have all sorts of anomalies happen out there. Something didn't get filled right or numbers are transposed and now you got errors and it takes somebody to go in with context knowledge to be able to correct it. You've got treasury processes where you're pushing around vast amounts of money. Do you really want that all automated?
That's right.
Are you ready to take a flight on a completely automated commercial jet? I don't know. I'm not, but maybe some are.
I
My
didn't want to ride in the driverless cars.
Yeah. I have not done a driverless
Not
car. I need to
happening.
do that. Yeah, I need
Yeah,
to do
we
that.
were talking about the travel to the moon or whatever. My wife was like, "I don't think I would do it." And I was like, "Well, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to be the Gen One rider. I'll wait
Yeah.
until they've ironed out a few.
You'll
I'll
let the first
I'll
few
yeah, let them
thousand
iron out a
go
few
before you.
years of trying before I jump in there. But I would
Get the
love if I
kinks
had the
out. Work the kinks out.
yeah, if I had the money, I'd go to the moon. If I could, I mean, that'd be cool to get your passport stamped on the moon, right?
It
But
would,
yeah,
but I still believe, particularly in the treasury area, you're gonna have, some
agreed.
manual, you know, humans in there making sure all the plates are spinning on the right sticks.
Yeah, I think there's a few gotchas too on the idea of service as a software or trying to perpetuate that model. And part of it is, buyers are frustrated with year over year increases. Let's just talk the technology in the SaaS model today. You get your subscription model and there's year over year increases that are supposed to include innovation, but new SKUs pop up with additional charges all over the place, right? So that constant pressure to increase the cost just on the technology alone, not even the services bit, is a challenge for HR in particular, who is always told to do more with less. And
Yeah,
at some point in time, those two things are at odds. And as a leader, you have to kind of decide, well, is it less risky for me to have the pros handling this for me and manage that? Or touchless payroll? I mean, automation all over the place. Maybe I need to figure it out because I can't handle these built in increases year over
yeah,
year.
yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on that around the way, say, for example, Workday is looking, or any of the HCMs are looking to price AI? There's a little bit of right now, I think it's, depends on the platform, but it's a bit in module. There's some add-ons that you could take on. And then there's obviously, Workday has the Flex Credit program. There's some usage, charges at some vendors. But What are your thoughts on that, man? What do you what do
I'm
you think
not
we're going to
really
see?
I'm not as current as I used to be on the Workday pricing strategy. I will tell you that, they have escalators, inflationary
Yeah,
CPI escalators. So do we, just to cover the inevitable inflation that's, works through the system. A lot of those got put in place when we were in this very inflationary period a couple of years ago when everybody was getting killed with, I can't raise my prices, but yet, I'm seeing 9% inflation or whatever it was. I
It
can't
was a
remember.
non-issue for decades, right? When we
Yeah,
were
yeah,
close to
exactly.
no
And we
inflation.
didn't
Yeah.
really do it too much until that happened. But there was a fair amount of acceptance because reality was what it was at the time. But I don't know how they're pricing AI or whether it's, just built into their value proposition. I honestly don't
yeah.
know.
It's a little bit of both. Yeah, yeah. I'm just curious what the what the buyers are sort of their tone is around it because it seems kind of mixed for adoption at all. It's particularly for HR. It's not like you're going to see companies go, oh hey, here's this wad of cash, go do some AI. They're going to have to get it by way of their applications, and I would imagine that most of them aren't, to Julie's point, going to want these added on sort of SKUs and things that they hey, I've got another bill I have to pay now. So just curious to see how that's going to shape up. But
Yeah, I think,
yeah,
the customers that I'm familiar with are pretty vocal about that kind of stuff though. I mean, they're
yeah,
certainly paying a premium for Workday in our position.
yeah,
And they expect that it will be global, that it will be scalable, that it will serve them for years to come and provide the kind of AI, improvements that they would expect from a top tier player. So
yeah.
they're pretty vocal on that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they
They'll
should
let
be.
their opinion be known.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're doing something at an enterprise level anyway, and then that's trickling outward. But yeah, we'll see. It's all very early still, I feel like. But
Yep,
I
I
want
agree.
I want to come back to the offshoring outsourcing thing, right? We've seen a lot of the the AI getting blamed, right, for a lot of layoffs. And if you dig in deeper, it's not entirely AI. In fact, it's a lot of H-1Bs, a lot of outsourcing and offshoring. It looks like it's going on, or offshoring, maybe not by way of outsourcing.
Hmm.
Do you think we're going to see a swing back to that, a bit of offshoring
Yeah,
type
I've
demand?
seen a real constriction on the H-1B visas with the Trump
Oh yeah.
administration. So I don't think that's going to be expanding.
But the rise in number of people being sent offshore, if you look at some of the data that's bouncing around out there, it looks like companies are actually
Yeah,
just hiring in other places.
yeah,
Yeah,
easily be.
yeah,
I think, it all depends on whether those are customer facing people
yeah,
or, what the philosophy is of the company, what kind of value proposition they put out there. For us, what we want is a family feel to
yeah,
our interactions with our customer, right?
yeah,
So I'm not just here. Hopefully if you're in the South, I'm in the South. We've got folks that we can relate to, that we can understand, that will take enough time to actually listen and solve my problem, and do it with an expertise that they can't find someplace else. I mean, that's always been our approach
yeah,
to, good customer service means you listen and you solve the problem. You don't just ping pong them around and transfer them here, and you got to tell your story over and over again. You've been there as a consumer,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that's always been our philosophy is a personal touch.
I think there's going to have to be more of that in this future automation age, right? It's like going to be the subline of some company. We've always been the human in the loop. Maybe that's OSV's new tagline.
I don't think people want impersonal and
I agree.
people who can't relate to them and can't understand them. I think it's frustrating the customer. And
It is. Yeah,
we've just
it
always
is.
said we're not doing that. We're going to be the other guys.
I bet
Agreed.
there's an element of generational to that though. I mean, look at the latest concerns about wresting, AI boyfriends and girlfriends out of, underage underage
Mhm.
minors and so forth,
Oh yeah.
where
Yeah.
where those connections, artificial as they may be, are seemingly meaningful in some level,
You're
right?
talking about somebody getting spoofed, that it's actually
Yeah,
someone
I'm
else
just
on
talking
the other
about
end of your communication. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
there's some horror stories about that.
it feeling more personal than it really is, right?
Yeah.
Because of the
Yeah,
the echoing of tone and, just kind of some of the learning of how to successfully interact with an individual. It does personalize what is not a personal connection. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
guess it remains to be seen how far
yep.
they thread the needle.
Well,
The future's here.
some of these fake things coming out of AI, I think, are showing people that, you can't be very trusting these days because it gets
Yep.
really sophisticated and it's very believable if you're not, whether you're getting
Yeah.
scammed
Skeptic.
or whatever the case may be. I think it's going to educate people on, having a
Yep.
skepticism about what they're seeing or looking at.
Agreed. Agreed. What are your thoughts, just personally, Trey, on AI? You've seen everything in outsourcing and transformation. What are your thoughts on it, and how
I
would
mean,
you
I
be
think it will
approaching it?
be a very helpful tool. I don't know that it will
Yeah.
be the come all be all, that all of a sudden everything's automated to, to the fact. I don't believe that. I think the world is too complicated.
Yeah.
There are too many permutations and shades of gray out there for a machine to correctly find their way through, you know, complicated transactions. So I
Yeah.
think it will have its place. It will make our lives easier and take away some of the things that are mundane. But I don't think it will put us all out of work.
Yeah. Agreed. I love that. I was talking to I think it was a firm recently, and we were just talking about kind of, the future with automation. And I was saying to them, I said, look, we were talking it through the context of payroll and compliance. And I said, listen, let's just assume you got in a country, that's a county, and you had every single company as modernized as they could possibly be from a finance and HR perspective. And you had everything that was necessary: cloud, analytics, APIs, all of it. I said, the reality of it is, if the governments don't equalize and transform equally, it's all kind of pointless, right? It's like the idea that you could somehow automate all of this, right, infinitely and end to end, and do away with, so all the friction that comes with payroll and benefits and compliance and all of that is so impossible, because of the number of interoperable players that have to agree and handshake and work together. Hell, Word from Microsoft on the Mac doesn't always work right together. You know what I mean?
That's
Like,
right.
so how are we going to get that? That's where I think the friction and rub is, especially here in America, where everybody's got their little land grab and their dollar bucket. They don't want anybody touching that. You see it now with the banks, right? Fighting with the open banking, younger, newer, emerging things, because they don't want to share their data. And you can understand, but that's also because they didn't innovate. So yeah, it's this, I think there's a lot of, there's just so much that would have to happen to make all of this function autonomously. Long way of
Well, we'll
saying that.
see, right?
Yeah, we
If we had a
we will.
crystal ball, we'd be placing the right bets right now, wouldn't we?
That's
I
right.
know, I know. But Trey, look, I love talking to you, man. Always, I really appreciate
Sure.
you coming on. I want to wrap this up with one question. If you were a CHRO or a CFO right now, what would be your advice to them if they're in a situation where they haven't necessarily transformed or are on some sort of path and it's stalled and the future's coming and they don't feel like they're necessarily where they should be? Like, what would be your advice to them to get them on the right path, towards future-proofing themselves, getting themselves ready for the next thing?
Well, I would say it doesn't get easier with time.
Fair
So at
enough.
some point, to the extent that you have not harmonized your processes and you haven't streamlined things and made them efficient, it's not going to do itself. It will keep, holding you back as an organization in terms of adapting to change, doing M&A work, what have you. So pick your time and get on it and get it over with,
Jump on.
because
Yeah.
it ain't going to get any easier.
My my stepdad used to say that those leaves aren't going to rake themselves.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is. You're right. We've talked that on here. Just start somewhere, right? I mean, we're not all probably going to get the perfect environment, situation, lot of money, whatever. But you can do what you can with what you can. I think you're right. It's never, it's getting late, but or I mean, it's early, but it's also getting late. So it needs people to get going for sure.
I think since SaaS, we've seen almost an advantage, to not
Yeah.
being tied to those big, heavy investments, right? And if SaaS wasn't the time to jump in and leapfrog in, now we're in the next phase, right? The
Yeah.
automation
Well,
phase.
I
And
think you
so,
probably had to do something if you went to a SaaS-based ERP,
yeah,
because it's just not as customizable as the old on-premise stuff. So you had to make some choices. I mean, that's the time to do it. That's the
yeah,
time to
Agreed.
do it when you've got a major forklift ERP change or something that makes you stop and say, "Look, I got to get in this software, and I'm going to get in it in a very rationally thought out, transformative way, and
harmonized.
I'm going
Yeah.
to make my company simpler and more streamlined." And
Yeah.
is it hard? Yes, it's hard. Will people whine and cry about having to change? Yes. But if that's where you want to get to, there's no alternative.
Agreed. And there's help out there for sure. Get help.
Sure, yeah, there's a
Um,
million people who
And
do
it's
this
been
now.
done.
Yeah,
yes,
many times.
exactly.
Lots of war
Exactly.
stories.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, look, this has been fantastic, Trey. Where can folks get in touch with you? We'll be sure to share the links. LinkedIn? LinkedIn, okay?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
on
All right.
LinkedIn. Absolutely. That'd probably be
We'll
the best
share
way.
We
Sure.
will. We'll share that, make sure everybody has it. And thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Good to see you again, Julie. And we will be back very, very soon with more content.